Hello and welcome to the Art Class Curator podcast. I am Cindy Ingram, your host and the founder of Art Class Curator and the Curated Connections Library. We're here to talk about teaching art with purpose and inspiration, from the daily delights of creativity to the messy mishaps that come with being a teacher. Whether you're driving home from school or cleaning up your classroom for the 15th time today, take a second, take a deep breath, relax those shoulders, and let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I am excited today to welcome another amazing guest interview. Today, I am talking with Jeffrey Benson. Jeffrey Benson is an internationally known author and has worked for over 40 years as a teacher, mentor, and administrator. And he has the good fortune of working with wonderful people on school reform, conflict resolution, learning theory, trauma, addiction, advisory programs, math education, staff development, leadership training, and curriculum development. And he now coaches principals and teachers, writes about education, speaks at conferences, and all in an effort to upload what he has learned in hopes that others make good use of it. His work now focuses on schools being more successful with more students, always rooted in understanding how people learn, which should be the starting point for all that we do in school. So every link that we talk about today will be in our show notes, and you can also visit his website at jeffreybenson.org. And today we are specifically talking about social and emotional learning and about Jeffrey's new book, which is called Improve Every Lesson with SEL. So without further ado, here is my interview with Jeffrey Benson. I am so excited to welcome Jeffrey Benson to the Art Class Curator podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So I recently discovered your book, and I watched also a webinar of yours on the ACSD website. And so I am so excited to have you on to talk about social and emotional learning, because that is, one of the big things, if not the most big thing that's happening in education right now. So before we get started in talking about that, can you tell me and the listeners a little bit more about you and your background and experiences?
Sure. So for a long time, I was a teacher and administrative principal in some schools, called educational director and others, of schools in the Boston area for students who weren't being successful in the mainstream. They had been traumatized, neglected, exploited, abused. They were trans, they were stoned, they were on spectrums, they were off spectrums. They didn't fit in any way. So, it was an opportunity for me to learn a lot about the lives kids lead, and also to understand the roles schools can play in supporting all sorts of kids and how to support schools in helping more kids be more successful. Because let's give you an example. And what was really helpful for me in my career was that I got to be a teacher for a lot of the years. I was also a school director, which also I always taught one course, helped me remember how hard teaching is, that I couldn't say to the staff at a meeting, like, let's all do this. And then I would do it and I'd be like, wow, that was hard for me to do in one class. I'm not sure how anyone can do it all day. And so it kept me humble. It kept me connected. And as all administrators say, the kids are still the best part of being in schools, and I didn't want to lose touch with them. So I got this experience of doing lesson plans where I would be thinking about my lessons, and I'd imagine that there was like a cartoon devil sitting across the table from me. And I would make my lesson plan, and then the devil would kind of leer at me and say, so, Jeffrey, you want to bet me that lesson plan is going to work for every kid? I'd be, ooh, and I would feel like a shiver through my body. I was like, why aren't I betting on this? And I was like, oh, because Cindy's going to have a problem at this point. I mean, now I know when we do this transition, that's a hard time for her. And Jeffrey's probably not going to be happy at this point unless I attend to this part of that for him. And so I'd have to say, okay, I'm not done with this lesson plan. Because it's partly an equity issue about, so who's the lesson plan for? Whose children is the lesson plan written for? Isn't it written for everybody's child? And they were my students. They were my kids. So from that came the notion that what was necessary for certain kids is good for every kid. That I'm not happy that schools are happy that kids get C minuses and B pluses. I'm not happy that teachers ask questions and the same 5 kids raise their hands all the time. I'm not happy that kids don't ask questions that aren't just guess what is this what you want on the test questions. And our classrooms could be so much more. And part of why I wrote the book was because it's not a huge leap to get there. So yeah, so that's so my background was going from teaching, learning, to finally saying, how do I help other people do this? So it's been 8 or 9 years since I've been a principal now, writing books, teaching, consulting, coaching. I've been doing that.
Yeah, that's amazing. What you were talking about made me think of just a personal example of when I was in high school. And I've known my husband since we were in high school. And we both look back on our high school experiences, and we had completely opposite experiences, even though we were in the same school. I was encouraged to succeed, and I was, in all honors classes and straight A's and all this stuff. And then he was just kind of barely skating by. And I'm like, how could two kids go through the exact same educational system in the exact same school with the same social economic stat? It was all the same thing, but so drastically different.
Right.
And I love that. And I think about his teachers, and I'm like, well, what were they? What were they doing? Why weren't they reaching him? Because he's so smart and he's all this stuff. But I'm like, that
you have to go back to this notion that schools were never structured, resourced, or intended to educate everybody's child.
Yeah.
Never. We've never been successful. We graduate more kids now than ever in the history of the country. Percentage of high school kids graduating time higher than ever. And that's just through the hard work teachers have done. We've learned more about how kids learn. We've learned more about diversity and inclusion. But ultimately, we're still working in a system that isn't made to be successful for all kids. Too many kids in the class, too many responsibilities as a teacher. Yeah, so that's my work has been a lot of let's each of us get a few more kids over the finish line.
Yeah,
that's the work.
Yeah.
We can do that.
Every teacher gets a few more kids. Then
that's the
multiply that number by the number of teachers.
Yep, that's the idea.
And one of the things that you did when I was watching your webinar is you started it by asking this question: how do you want your students to grow this year? Yeah. And I loved that, because I asked a similar one. I asked, what do you want your kids to remember about art in 20 years? So it just takes you out of the let's teach about the zigzag line, and moves you into something greater. So can you speak to why you asked that question and why it's meaningful to consider?
Right. Well, part of my belief is that every teacher does actually, I'll say almost every teacher, actually care about more than just the kids on the test. We all have an implicit social emotional curriculum for our kids. We want them to ultimately contribute to their communities. We want them to feel good about themselves as learners. We want them to be members of the classroom community in terms of helping each other, listening, learning from each other. That's not on the test. That's just what we all want. And so the question says, let's take that from an implicit to an explicit place. So if in fact, what do I want from my kids at the end of this year? I want them all to know how to talk to their friends in class about learning. And if I did that every day, the same way I talk about, don't forget to put your name on the top of the paper. Don't forget to raise your hand before you ask a question. Don't forget to put your chair in at the end of the classroom. But what if I said every day we're going to talk about how do we learn from each other in this class? Let's remember to do that today. Our class becomes that place. We start embedding that into the character of the kids who come into our class every day. We have them for 150, 180 days a year. That's a lot of time to work on those skills. When we only do it implicitly and randomly, it's not enough. Some kids get it, some don't. But if we say this is part of, I have a great phrase, which is how we roll around here. This is how we roll in this class. And I use that a lot. So how we roll in this class, remember, in this class, other people do different things, but in this class, how we roll is we learn from each other. And so making that's why the question is so important, to say, right, we all have it anyhow in us. So I don't think almost any teacher doesn't care about their kids in that way. Again, the structure hasn't asked us to do so, hasn't given us the resources to do so, hasn't honored us for doing so.
Yeah. It reminds me, I was listening to another podcast episode recently about the presidential physical fitness test. And it was talking about how they give this test every year, but they don't actually train the kids in how to do a pull-up,
but just once a year.
I remember that. Right.
Yeah. And it's like, well, and you kind of think about the way you were saying is if your goal is you want kids to talk about learning, but then the rest of the year you don't do it,
Right.
like you have to have practice in the thing that you're wanting them to do. So
right.
It made me
and you would ask me to think about, so what's the problem with just having a 15-minute lesson about it? For that very reason, because it lives everywhere, every day in the school, these things. It can't just be sort of boxed in that space and check off and say, okay, we talked about this. It's actually what we do all the time. And by doing it all the time, it's also easier for us. But it's not, here's a part of that it's got your great question about what do you want to remember 20 years from now? Almost every adult on the street would fail every high school final.
Yeah.
Almost everything after 7th grade is sort of optional in terms of curriculum. And I wanted all my students always to thrive and learn this stuff. But ultimately, we're actually teaching that what's called sometimes the secondary curriculum, the implicit curriculum, which is we're teaching them ultimately how to be contributing members to their communities. Do you need always to know how to do semicolons to do that? I'm not sure, although I love semicolons. But do you need to know how to learn? Do you need to know how to listen? Do you need to know how to express yourself? That's the stuff that we really, it's what we're really doing. So that doesn't happen 15 minutes a day.
Yeah.
That's all the time.
Yeah. So when we're talking about, kind of backing up just a little bit, is when we're talking about social and emotional learning, how would you define that? And what are sort of the main characteristics of social and emotional learning?
Well, it's an interesting thing because I'm going to talk a little about brain science and what we've learned. The last 30 years of brain science has been amazing. We still don't know a lot about what's going on in our skulls, but we know so much more. And I always think that at least two professional groups that need to know about brain science are brain surgeons and teachers, because we're both trying to make some changes in there. And what's really clear now is that there's a great quote from a brain scientist, neurologist, who was originally a high school science teacher, which is why I love her in particular, which is that you actually can't learn something you don't care about. There actually has to be a personal, emotional investment to learn something. Each person can find a different personal, emotional investment to get there, but you don't learn it without some investment of you in some fashion. So there is actually no separation. The reason that in some ways we tolerate C minuses, B pluses is because on some level you can sort of remember to the test enough stuff to get a C plus, C minus, or B plus on the test. But if I'm going for bigger fish here, fishing for bigger fish, which is lifelong learning, a lifelong influence on the kids, you don't get that without bringing their emotional resonance to the class. The second part about the social part is this is happening in a social setting. School is a social setting. It's not one-on-one tutorials, where still you need to have an emotional component. But this is a social setting in which you're learning. So how do we leverage that social setting so that the kids feel more compelled to dive into the work and feel like that's what we do? That's how we roll around here. Everyone's chattering. Everyone's doing stuff. You walk in, Cindy's classroom, it's busy. It's active. You can't just sit around. That's what happens in that class. Right. So technically, really, you can't separate them. What we know is that everything that goes into all the stimulation from the world that ultimately has to get put into your long-term memory through a cognitive part goes through the same apparatus that regulates and monitors your emotions. It doesn't pass by that to go, we get the whole student walks in the room. We don't only get their frontal lobe. We get the whole kid, and if you don't account for that, when I go back to thinking about my students and the devil sitting across from me, I would always think that they were landmines and potholes, sinkholes in my lesson plan for kids. And I don't want them to step on a landmine. And that was to be aware of the social and emotional context within which what happens in the classroom and the demands of the kids. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some of, I was thinking what we could do is talk through how you add, because your book is, which we don't think we ever said the name of your book, and I apologize to the listeners.
It's Improve Every Lesson Plan with SEL.
I would have said it I said in the intro. So
right. There it is. That's it again.
There it is. We did say it. I will say it in the intro that I record later.
Okay.
Improve every lesson.
That one over. Right.
Yeah. So I thought we could talk about like what are some of the SEL skills you like to focus on and how teachers can embed them into various parts of the lesson. So maybe can you give us an example of a full lesson and how you might add an SEL at each step?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to do this with you. So let's
good.
say you're been our teacher. So let's first talk. What's a typical lesson that might happen? So in your art room. By the way, I want to say, through the years of being a director of schools that work with kids who didn't fit in typical classrooms, our teachers were so integral to the lives of my school. So often, like when we would be having a meeting about a kid who might be struggling, and the English teacher would talk about how they're struggling, the science teacher would talk about how they're struggling, and the art teacher goes, "That's not the kid I see." It's like, right. Okay, tell us about the kid you see. And that was so common. There's something in art classes, oftentimes when I talk to principals about get out of the office and enjoy kids, if they're elementary school principals, I say, go to the kindergarten room. Hang out with the kindergarten kids. You can't help but smile after that. Secondary, high school, I say, go to the art room. Go hang out with kids there. You're going to see something else going on there. So, all right, so let's go through a lesson. What's a lesson we can work with, Cindy, an art lesson?
Okay. Well, a typical one for me would be we're focusing on a work of art.
Yep.
So do you want me to go into detail about which one I'm imagining, or does it matter?
No.
And then, we talk about it, and we then do some sort of engaging activity about it. So maybe write a poem about it or something. And then maybe we would sketch it or talk about or lead into some sort of project around it. So some sort of
is there a
thing.
That's what I wanted. Is there a particular sub goal here with either this particular artwork or so what I want kids to do from doing this activity is I want them to get better. I want to build up their rubric of how to critique a piece of art, or I want them to know how to talk about what they like about a piece of art, or I want them to understand how art impacts their own emotional life and the emotions that art evokes in people. And so we're going to examine this piece of artwork through one of these lenses, and then we're going to have you try to do a piece of artwork that can evoke similar things.
Yes.
Okay, so let's work with that one. Let's work with that. Okay, so kids walk in the classroom. It's the first thing. So we're gonna greet them in some fashion. I have one thing. I think you can do 1,000 different things in any classroom, but I think there's one thing that must be done every day in every class, which is the teacher says hello to every kid. I think it's the only absolute I have. So in some fashion, the kids are coming in, you're greeting them, they're doing stuff. Here's the first time I'm going to say, okay, how do we roll around here in this classroom? And let's use the skill of contributing to the community. So in this classroom, how we roll around here, this is not just about Cindy doing well, even if no one else does well. This is a classroom in which we all live and work together. And the greater good is what we're looking at in this classroom. So we never let just one person answer for everyone, because everyone's brain is part of this classroom. So walking in the room, and I'm going to start thinking about, okay, what am I going to say to kids when they walk in the room? Hey, everyone, we're going to have an amazing conversation today about this piece of artwork, and we're going to do something really cool, which is we're going to share our emotional sort of reaction to this piece of artwork. So as you're walking to your desk right now, I want you to just ask the person next to you, how are they feeling right now? Just one other person, just ask them how they're feeling, because we're going to start working with that. We're going to see if that impacts how they think about the artwork. So they just, right now, I'm already got them thinking about that part of it as they're walking to their desks. Usually we have then the next part is, in some sense, and this is maybe less in art class one, but not necessarily, where we reference a previous lesson. Remember yesterday? So I'm going to say okay, everyone think for a moment. What were some of the takeaways we had from yesterday's class? So again, I want to stop and say a really common activity, I'm loath to call it an activity, question teachers ask is, who can tell me what we did in class yesterday? Before the question is done in the teacher's mouth, the same 5 kids raise their hands all the time. Yeah. This is a key issue. This is a social emotional issue. It's not cognitive, because we all know that every kid was there yesterday. They all know something, but when I'm asking who can tell me, it's really guess what the teacher's thinking question. 90% of the questions we ask in school are guess what the teacher is thinking. Not everyone wants to play that game. What's the point of it? The teacher knows what she's thinking. One of those other 5 kids will raise their hand. They'll say it. The teacher will repeat it back. I'm not needed right now. Instead, if I say, everyone, 10 seconds of think time, think of one memory from class yesterday. Because how we roll around here is everyone shares their thinking. I want everyone to think of one lesson, memory from yesterday's lesson, and we're going to pool our memories, and together we're going to remember all the cool things that happened. So one person might say, hey, Mr. B, I remember when you were writing on the board and the chalk broke. I was like, yeah, I remember that too. But even that brings people back, because what was I writing? Somebody else says, I remember when Cindy had that great idea about Picasso. I'm like, oh man, I remember it too. Everyone remember that? That was cool. And it's cool that you remembered that Cindy said that. That was really nice to give Cindy a shout out there. Somebody else might say, remember when we were stuck on that question for like 1 minute and no one could figure out the answer to it? I'm like, oh man. And but everyone's contributing, everyone's thinking, everyone is bringing themselves back into that. So I love that. It only takes a minute. Now, sometimes if lots of kids want to talk, I might say, do a turn and learn. 15 seconds each, talk to your partner about what you remember, because I don't need to hear everything. If everyone in the class is suddenly talking, I'm like, great, all their minds are right now back in yesterday's class. All their synapses and that neural network from yesterday has been brought back to life, instead of 5 kids raising their hands and me dully saying back what happened. So that's for me, my favorite of how do we bring everyone back to prior learning. All right, now we're going to look at this. So now we have a little direct instruction, which is I'm going to show you a piece of artwork. I'm going to just give you a little background to it, and then you're going to have your kind of responses to it. All right, the question is, what is each of your job here to make this class work for everyone around this? So it seems like partly we should probably all be quiet for about 30 seconds while I describe something, because that'll help everyone, right? I'm not going to ask you to be quiet forever, but maybe 30 seconds. Let's kind of get our focus. And then after I'm done talking, I'm going to have you turn to your partner and say, what did Mr. Benson just say? And do it kind of like, did that make sense to you? Yeah. And make sense of it with each other. And then we'll take a few samples. And I might even say, Cindy, you were talking to Jeffrey. Don't tell me what you told Jeffrey. Tell me what Jeffrey told you. Because that's such a high level skill, because you're going to not only acknowledge what Jeffrey said, but you're going to summarize it and synthesize it, honor him in that. And it means you've listened and you've considered. And I might say, can you synthesize what you said and what Jeffrey said? So there are all these different ways to get all the brains working. I'm getting to the lesson, but I'm getting where everyone is part of, because my goal is, how do we roll around here? We're all contributing to this classroom going. Now we're going to do the part where everyone's now looking at it, having their reactions to it. Now you get the idea. I'm already deep into this. Now I can walk around the room at this point and just be saying to kids, talk to me like, what are you seeing in this? And my favorite 3 words, tell me more. Mm-hmm. Tell me more. Because all I'm saying is you guide the conversation. I'm not trying to say, guess what Mr. Benson's thinking? Do you notice how Picasso used, depth perception here to alter? It's like, what did you see there? And I might say, hey, I loved seeing that too. I didn't even thought about what you just saw. I was looking at depth perception in this. Can you see that? And then now we're having a conversation. And the kid can hear that the kid has had a dialogue with me, which means Mr. Benson has been impacted by what a kid said. And that's huge for kids, that they help the teacher see the world through their eyes. So that's a big part of that follow-up. I want to come to one last part. A big believer in opening rituals. I used to say that I want my school to be better than the street and my classroom to be better than the hallway. I wanted like something drawing kids to the space that we were creating for them. So openings are really important. Greeting every kid. What's the first thing that happens? But I've come to believe closure is equally important. In a few schools I'm working with, I've been surprised that that's where they've gone to as their bang for the buck. The last 2 minutes of class, the worst thing I've done as a teacher, and we've all done this, is I'm writing on the board, I'm talking, the bell rings, mid-sentence, kids start packing up, they're rushing, they're trying to get somewhere. I'd be better off stopping 2 minutes beforehand, and I'm sure there will be a kid in the class who would volunteer to be that person, to ring me down with 2 minutes and say, okay, closure time. I'm going to give you some examples. And if you get in touch with me at my website, which is jeffreybenson.org, I can send you more of these examples. But one is, okay, just let's be quiet for 30 seconds. What do you want to remember from today's lesson? Everyone just quiet. This is not what Mr. Benson remembers. What do you remember? I might do a turn and learn. I might not on that one. I might have an exit ticket asking you to write that out for me so I can kind of get it. Next, turn to your partner. Do you both agree what the homework is? Because this is really important.
That's a good one.
We raise your hand, and if a whole bunch of you are raising your hands, bad on Mr. Benson. So the next 30 seconds is agree on homework. And sometimes with high school kids, I'll say, make a plan about when you're going to do homework because you got a lot to do. When are you going to do this? Another one is, this is a good one for middle school students, make a plan with your partner how you're going to get to next class on time. What do you have to do? And make a bet with each other. Can you both get to class on time? Let me know tomorrow. I'm going to start keeping score. Who got there? Because you want to go to the water fountain? You want to go to your locker? You want to check in with your friend? You want to see this other teacher? There's no chance you're getting to class on time. Make a plan how to do that. And the last one might be me saying, feedback. I'll do two more. One is feedback time, because this is how we roll around here. We all learn. Is there anything I, as the teacher, did today, and 10 seconds of think time, I always give think time, that helped? And is there any advice you have for me that I could have done my part of this lesson better? So when the next class comes in, they'll benefit from what you watch me do, because I'm learning with you guys in this. And then my last favorite one is, so you can't do these all in 2 minutes, but you get your own deck of cards of these, and then you find what works for you. And this is my favorite one. We're going to do 30 seconds of gratitude. Think for 10 seconds. Who in this class helped you have a good class? And we're going to take just a few shout outs. So somebody might say, I want to thank Cindy for lending me an eraser. Yeah, that's great. Somebody else might say, I want to thank, Jose for asking me how my mom was because my mom was sick, and I really appreciated him asking me that. I might say, hey, I wanted to thank you two guys for cleaning up the waste paper basket when it fell over. You just did it. That's how we roll around here. We take care of each other. And I will also do part of that gratitude because that's what we do. And it's a great way to end a class because it says we're all in this together. We work together. This is our space together. Sometimes I will walk around class. I might say, hey, Cindy, don't forget to thank Jeffrey if you want to at the end because I just noticed that. You don't have to, but I bet that would be a cool thing to do during our gratitude time. So it takes time to scaffold kids up to those. So if you think about actually all these parts of the lesson plan, we have endless opportunities to prompt and model and praise kids for using their SEL skills. We've done it anyhow. But if I come in saying I'm going to focus on one of them in particular, I'm going to notice it all the time now. I'm going to notice every time some kid helps another kid. I'm going to notice every time a kid says, can I sit over here because I learned better over there? Yes, that's how we roll in this class. People make decisions about where to sit so that they can be successful. Once you put that frame on, this is why to me it's not super hard. I'm saying that, I know that's a little glib, but we do it anyhow. And once you realize that all these junctures in the lesson, and you just say, oh, that's what I do. I remind kids at these junctures, and you're just going to be flooded with it. In some ways, you're going to say, I can't keep saying this all the time. What looks like hard to do is actually, it's like there's pieces of candy on every desk. Just go around, pick up those pieces of little Hershey's Kisses. They're all over the room all the time.
Yeah, it's just like when you're shopping for a new car, suddenly you notice every single car on the road.
Right.
And so when you're looking for those opportunities to notice when students are using these skills,
and so part of why we divided the book into the chapters we did was, one, it gave me a really great structure for writing the book, but the other was there are all these predictable things that happen in every class, almost every day, that are like, oh, here's when I can do it. So when you're writing your lesson plan, part of it is, you make a little note to yourself. I want to use this prompt. I want to remember to remind Cindy of this one particular, but it's just going to start like oozing out. It's going to be hard to avoid it.
Yeah, I love that. There's so much of what you said. That hit me. I was taking notes. And one thing I noticed was how when you were saying what you would say to the students, you very often pointed out the skill that you were focusing on, or pointed out the skill that they were working on. And so I think they learn to develop the language of those sorts of things so that they can take that with them.
Another nice piece to this, and this is around what we discipline management, redirecting kids. instead of telling kids what not to do, it gives us the language of telling them what to do. So like right now, we're trying to have everyone help each other do this. So how can you do that? Versus stop doing this, don't do that. It's like, Cindy, hey, this is a time we're really trying to focus on helping each other notice something in the artwork. And I know you can contribute to that as well. So it gives you the positive language all the time right there in front of you. And that's a tough habit to break for all of us, to praise more than redirect. There's always kids who are doing what we want them to do. And there's always something to ask kids to do that contributes to the greater good in a class.
Yeah. And another thing I've noticed just as a teacher, that sometimes praise can feel, I don't know if it's forced, but I think kids can tell when you're just praising them just for the sake of praising them. And the way that you are describing it, it's praising them for very specific things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that makes a huge difference too.
Well, I have a funny notion about this. I want to talk a little about this because I'm going to do a whole podcast with a friend of mine, Mike Anderson, just on this notion of praise. Because he similarly says, you shouldn't praise falsely, which is true, of course.
Yeah.
However, I started doing this in my school. It became part of our year's professional development with each other, because we wanted to actually look at how much we praise versus redirect it. And, the gold standard is to praise 5 times as often as you redirect. So I started walking around whenever I was in classrooms doing observations or just doing whatever. I would keep a little hash marks on my hand or on a piece of paper, how often people praise versus redirected. Well, I have to tell you, this is the sad part. The very best teachers, the ones who would say were the most beautiful, loving teachers, probably are about twice as many praises to redirects. They were literally only 2 to 1. Most teachers were about 50-50. So when people say to me, let's make sure we don't praise kids sort of like superficially, I'm like, no, please start with that. Get over to that side of the continuum, and then we can work on, right, it was a good job because you remembered to add commas. It was a good job because you self-checked yourself. It was a good job because you gave yourself a minute break. But, I would suggest this for those of you who are listening. Do this as a test for yourself. By the way, just the fact that you're going to be aware of it means you'll probably praise more than you would have. Yay, that's great. Try it. See how often you actually say to kids, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. I love what you're doing. Great to see you doing that, versus redirecting kids. It's eye-opening.
Yeah, it really is. Because I think I can understand why, because our brains are wired to look for things that are different,
Aberrant.
Right. We look for that. We're like, that's not right. And so we immediately go to that's not right. And so that if everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, we just kind of gloss over it.
And those people should be like the stars of the class. Like, hey, Cindy, you've been focusing 5 minutes on your drawing. That's great. That was fantastic. Yeah. Versus, that's what you're supposed to do. Like, you know what? I don't mind praising kids for doing what they're supposed to do. Actually, really, because I'm still telling them, I am noticing them doing something that's really good. Yeah. Go for it. By the way, I have to say, you will smile way more. And what I also learned from that was that the ratio, the 5-to-1 ratio, is interesting. It's for the whole class. So if I've had to redirect a kid, I'm immediately looking around the room for somebody to praise because it makes me feel good. It's like I cleanse my own soul in that moment. But I have to get back to that other kid. I also have to be 5-to-1 to that kid who I redirected. So I'm going to look to that kid. The second that kid's I'm going to say, hey, man, good job getting back on task. Love that. I'm going to come back later and say, you know what I liked? I liked that you didn't argue with me, because it was like I was telling you the truth, right? And you took it and you did great listening to the redirection. I really appreciated that. So I'm going to look, because I got to get to 5-to-1 on him too. So it's an incredible, intense, but I want to say, again, something we do anyhow. And it's just choosing our practice and being conscious about our own practice. But the good part about it is it's not painful. It's actually, your endorphins are going to just skyrocket.
Yeah, that's adding so much joy. And to think about the difference that it makes, because I know of instances where someone has noticed something that I did that I felt kind of invisible, and then someone pointed out something good I did. It boosts me. It changes my day. It moves me, and I still can remember that years later.
I want to point out, even as adults, and having been a principal, When your supervisor or principal acknowledges something good you're doing, it feels good. It's like, hey, your bulletin board looks great. I saw your kids coming out of class and they were talking about the work you were doing, that they were doing in class. Hey, thanks for coming early to the staff meeting and helping me set up the tables. It helps. It feels good. And, it's my work with administrators is they also need to be doing that, getting out and praising.
Yeah, because teachers feel pretty unappreciated, especially these days.
Like the kid who's sitting in class doing what they're supposed to do, and no one says, hey, thank you for doing what you're supposed to do. I love that. Teachers too.
I love that.
Yeah.
And another thing I noticed that when you were kind of going through that lesson was that you made yourself a part of the community too, and you positioned yourself not as the authority, but as a learner, and as, when you asked, is there anything I could have done better?
Right.
I think that is an amazing opportunity to model for your students that your adults are still learning and teachers are not perfect, and we are still caring about how we are in the world. And I think that's really powerful.
Right. And I want to speak to a fear people have about that, which is really interesting to me, because I want to say that I have no doubt that I am the adult in the room. Yeah. I have no doubt that my job, my responsibility, my obligation, my paycheck is dependent on this room functioning well. And I'm certainly going to make sure that that's going to happen, because that is, do I want to bring the kids into doing that? Absolutely. Do I want to empower them to feel like this is their space to make safe as well? Absolutely. But I want to say that it's counterintuitive, but by doing that, more kids will actually attend, more kids will actually listen, more kids will take instruction and redirection from me because I am in dialogue with them about it. It's not going to be like I'm only telling them what to do, which only creates a culture of conflict. So I have to say, this is a funny part too, that I know in the range of the world, I'm a nice guy, I'm a nice teacher and all that stuff. But partly why I do all this is because I want to kiss their asses in academics. I want to take away all of the impediments that come with the culture of school, the culture of testing, the culture of failing, the culture of pressure. And I want to say, I want all their brains to be like right there with me. So I've got to kind of do a lot of labor to undo the culture of that's them and this is me. That they try to get away with as little work as possible, and I try to force them to do as much work as possible. So it's partly because I want to say, and I'm not bragging about this, my kids did better because I did all of that stuff. I got more academically out of them. It wasn't fluff. It didn't take away from instructional time. It made the instructional time focused. And that's really important.
I think that's really important to those teachers who think that, oh, this is one more thing. I can't do this and still teach the standards I need to teach, that they help each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is not one more thing. This is just doing what you already do explicitly. And then you'll do it more often then, but yay, it's just going to make the lessons go better. You're going to do less reteaching. You're going to have less redirecting to do. The kids will take care of each other more. You'll like the kids more.
Yeah.
What's bad about that?
Yeah, you will. Yeah, I've seen that to be true too in my own teaching.
Yeah,
I do like my kids more when I focus on them. It makes sense, obviously.
Yeah.
So I love your talk about doing this explicitly and intentionally rather than randomly and implicitly. And I feel like you've given us a lot of examples of that. Yeah. But is there a way that will help teachers be more intentional with how they do this? So, do you have any kind of tips for starting out?
I may be reiterating what I said earlier, but worth repeating because this is okay.
Yeah.
Which is, it goes back to that question. In what way do you want your kids to grow in this class? In addition to learning semicolons and how to do, vanishing points and things like that. So, okay, what's the prompt for that? So when I'm doing my lesson plan, okay, where I'm going to write in my lesson plan, say this at these junctures. And so it's like training oneself. I'm going to, some people put on the refrigerators when they're on a diet, eat a fruit, All right, I want to remember when I start my direct instruction, here's my prompt. I want to remember to have a closing activity and I'm going to choose one of these closing things. Just start with a couple of things. Start with what's one social emotional skill that you'd like kids to work on. I'd like them to listen to each other better. I'd like them to acknowledge their own strengths better. I'd like them to use words to describe how they're feeling and feel safe enough to do that. I'd like them to acknowledge how they're the same and different from other kids. Whatever one of those are, pick one and go with that until you're tired of it. And then do another, and find one or two junctures in the lesson where you're going to talk about it. What I'm saying is that pretty soon it's not going to be one or two moments because you're going to start seeing opportunities all along. But start small.
Yeah, because that's you building up your practice with that one too. Right. So in that time that you focused on it, it becomes sort of habitual. And then,
right. And then I'm going to say, in fact, start with what you've already been doing implicitly. And that's how I start saying, by the way, what are you doing already? Pick the one you're doing already. Do that.
Yeah.
Just do that well. Do it often. Have fun.
Yeah, that's really good because I have the tendency to get excited about something and then I go full force and I'm like, I'm going to do 10 SEL skills this week. So I love that it's start small, ease into it.
Right. You got enough. We're doing enough. And I want to say that most of you are doing enough. So this is just a little piece more. It shouldn't tip you over the edge of doing too much because then I would say take something else out and do this piece.
Yeah. It's definitely more important than creating that poster that the art club is making you do for the fundraiser later.
Right. But even that, once you get it, you're going to be using those prompts with the kids doing the art poster for the fair,
Oh, yeah. Awesome. So in addition to adding the SEL into the lesson plans, what are some other ways that teachers can intentionally put SEL at the forefront that we haven't talked about?
So I'll mention three, and they come with different amounts of stuff. One is saying hello in some fashion to every kid every day. And there's lots of rituals about how to do that. Some people stand at the door and they literally say hello to every kid by name. Hi, Jeffrey. Hi, Sue. Hi, Jose. Hi, Tony. Hi. And you just say it, Sometimes you walk around while kids are settling in and you just make eye contact and say, hey, good to see you. Hi, how are you? And you just look at each kid. They need that. That's a big one. In fact, that's what I say. That's the only one I think you have to do is acknowledge each kid's presence in your room. Do that. That's one minimal thing. If along the way you can say, hey, I love your hat. How's your new baby brother? Hey, I saw your post up. I went to the bathroom. One little thing that you can say that acknowledges who they really are and that you've noticed. So that's gold. So that's one piece. I would say easy to do, fun to do, a little energetic. You need to put a little energy, but you're going to get more energy back doing it. You're going to put out a little bit more. Second one is any opportunities for kids to have choice in what they're doing. And the first thing of acknowledging them as people is really important because I want them to see that they get to choose something that works best for them. There are multiple ways to reach almost every goal of a lesson plan. And I want to say, okay, here's 3 or 4 ways to do this. And one spot in particular, I think homework is a place to start. If you're looking for a place to do that, some kids only need one thing to do. I'm going to use a math example. For some kids, it's do one problem and then write to me how you did it, and I'll know you understand the problem. Other kids would be like, I hate writing. Can I just do 4 of them and get 4 of them done? I'm like, sure. I taught kids to say, do one, but I'm going to show you how to annotate doing a math problem. So you could just put little bubbles and show me the steps, or do a step-by-step analysis, just so an organization, bullet points, but they all got me to the same place. I want the kids to be engaged with it. Homework's a really good place to do that. And then I can sit and talk with kids. How come you chose that one? I want to know more about you. Did that work for you? So you have those dialogues around that. So wherever you can give kids some choice is really important. And then have a great conversation with kids about, hey, why'd you choose that? I didn't think you'd choose that one. Or sometimes I'll say to kids, hey, Cindy, see number 4 on the board? I thought of you when I wrote that in the lesson plan. So you could try number 1 or 2 or 3, but don't you think 4 would be good for you? And the kids will appreciate that and will be more invested in trying stuff. And again, it gets back to the social emotional skill of kids learning to know what their strengths and weaknesses are. And that's really cool. So say hi to kids, give them choice in some spot. Really helpful.
I love that. Yeah, and the student just feels seen, and so they're, that I think there has been research. I can't pull it out of my head right now, but that students who like and respect their teacher are more likely to do better in their class. I think I've read that somewhere.
Yes.
But
So I want to tell
find
you
the site.
one book that has all that data, which I often draw on a lot, is Russ Quaglia's book Student Voice, which has he did this amazing amount of research, and it's literally kids who feel seen by their teachers are more likely to try harder on their academics. He actually has all of that data. And I often use it in my workshops to say this actually is true. It doesn't just sound right. We actually have research on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kids who feel safe, kids who feel seen, kids who have choice.
Wonderful. So I'm going to check out that book. All of the books and links that we talk about in that episode will be in our show notes. But do you have any other, besides your own book, obviously, what are some of your favorite resources for SEL that you would recommend to a teacher?
So, I knew you were going to ask me that question, and I started, okay, there's this book, then this book, then this. Literally, it's like, okay, I'm going to narrow it down to just a few books for now. And also, again, I love being in touch with teachers. So at my website, jeffreybenson.org, is where you can email me. I will write back to you. I love being in touch with folks. In fact, also, so I also put together seminars of teachers, and we do Zoom seminars from teachers from all over the country. And we meet for 75 minutes in the evening, and we talk about this work together. So it's a chance also, if you're interested in being in a cohort of teachers who are doing similar work, I facilitate and I put that together. So anyhow.
Wonderful.
So books to consider. One of my favorites is Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. It's just like Zaretta got it. I'm going to say she gets in the same way I get it, and we're a mutually, supportive team in this way, because she looks at it through the eyes of culture and race and brain and curriculum. And it's a really wonderful book, and it's very practical and inspiring in that way. There's a book called Relationships, Responsibility, and Regulation. It's an ASCD book by Sewers, Souers, and Hall, which is a really nice complementary book to my book. And their book came out a year before mine. And I was saying to them, I'm not trying to step on your toes, but your book's so good. I better make sure I do more than your book did, because your book was so good. Okay, I have to do a plug for another book I co-wrote called Teaching the Whole Teen. Because we think social emotional learning is the elementary school stuff. And so with my work partner, Rachel Polliner, and I, we said, no, we're going to write this from a secondary school teacher's point of view. Because once I had a secondary school teacher said to me, Jeffrey, we're not going to take out the graham crackers and mats and do nap time. I was like, but you know what? It would be really good for high school teachers.
Yeah, they would love that.
Really good. But in any case, you have a different kind of parameters you work within. But does any high school teacher think their kids are actually emotionally fully regulated and fully developed? Of course not. So that's a really good one. And another one is from my colleague, Mike Anderson. All of his stuff is great. But the book I'm thinking of for today is What We Say and How We Say It Matters. And he's looking at prompts as well. And the things we say to kids, whether it sparks them to invigorate and try, or whether it makes them go into their shell and close down because of the implicit messages and how we say stuff. If you get those four, great. But again, write to me if you want other things. On my website are lots of articles I've written. They're all free. You can just go to the links. However I can help.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I hope that everyone hops over there, because I've learned so much today, and also have some books that I'm going to go read next as well. So you've already told us how to connect with you online, so that's beautiful. We'll put that in the show notes. But I do ask one final question of all of my guests, and that is, which artwork changed your life?
I love this question. And I thought of a couple, but I'll stick with one. I was lucky in that my fifth grade teacher had previously been an art teacher.
Oh.
And I am not a visually gifted artist. I know everyone can do stuff, and I've learned how to be a better drawer of stick figures as a teacher. I want to say that I became really good at drawing stick figures in a way that my students would watch me intently, because if they didn't watch me intently, there was no knowing what that actually was. So I had all their attention. But I've come to appreciate my own limited sort of, visual inherent skills. But having her as a fifth grade teacher was great because she brought this whole visual component into teaching and learning. And she also, I was growing up in New York City, took us to the Museum of Modern Art, where I would have never gone. It's not, my parents would have never taken me there. And I remember seeing the Magritte painting of the guy in the bowler hat with, I think, the apple in front of his face. I was like, wow, that's so funny. It was the first time I ever knew that art could be funny, because art was always like this thing, like the Sistine Chapel, serious and austere. And I was like, oh my God. And then like we talked about it, like, why would he have done that? And it's not just funny. What is it else? And we kind of did a little of the like, oh, it kind of like, so it's like, this is the early 60s. It was like pre-psychedelia. Like when Bob Dylan started writing like really like non-linear lyrics, I was ready for it because of that conversation about Magritte's painting. And since I'm a songwriter, it was like, I have never thought about the link to that Magritte painting, to the Bob Dylan lyrics, to my own kind of artwork as a writer and a songwriter. Yeah, it was like, oh, that was like thrilling. I can still remember looking at that. I couldn't believe that they put that in an art museum.
Yes, I love that story. That is so good because that's what art isn't always just this deep, serious thing. That it's filled with joy and delight and humor and fun. And that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, love your question.
Okay, well, thank you so very much for joining me today. I really enjoyed talking to you.
And I loved our conversation. You too, Cindy. Be in touch for anything. Loved having this conversation. I'm sure we can have many more.
Yes, thank you.
Art Class Curator and NASCO have come together to create two incredible full art curriculums, World Mosaic for elementary and Perspectives for high school. These are so much more than just lesson plans. Your students will experience powerful social-emotional learning that's integrated with language arts, social studies, history, and more, and they are totally aligned with national art standards. World Mosaic will take your elementary students on a journey around the globe as each unit features an artwork from a different part of the world, with art projects that explore various media and activities that will strengthen their critical thinking skills and expand their worldview. Perspectives is a high school course that explores how art connects us with ourselves and one another through 10 idea-centered themes, using diverse artworks, thought-provoking discussions, and engaging activities. Perspectives also gives teachers the option to create a choice-based classroom, so it's perfect for any type of teaching model. We are thrilled to be partnered with NASCO Education. They've been working with districts for years and are huge advocates for educators everywhere. You can learn more about these exciting curricula at artclasscurator.com/NASCO. Thank you so much for listening to the Art Class Curator podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and give us an honest rating on iTunes to help other teachers find us and hear these amazing art conversations and art teacher insights. Be sure to tune in next week for more art inspiration and curated conversations.